sit down.
Testing. Jim, can you hear me?
No. I think that's a no twice.
First turn is on.
Oh, it helps.
Now,
Well, we're waiting on making sure everything's turned on.
can you hear now?
Can you hear me now? All right, we're good to go. If you noticed your emails or picked up a hard copy of the bulletin, Brother Jeremy has run out of room for those that need prayers. He's got a full list here. Addison's home from the hospital. Brother Dave's recovering. Brother Johnson, that's waiting on a kidney transplant. Matthew McGee, Doris' son, is needing prayers. Brother Turner going through his treatments. Darrell Johnson, friend of the Days. Scott Ingram continuing to have problems with kidney stones. Rick May is still on the list. The Moody's, Brother Clonch, the Littles, Rosie and Tina, all of those still having issues. So, question?
Mr. Terry not here today?
Oh,
He is here?
okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's just his ongoing issues I'm talking about. That's all I know. Anyone else? Well, we got some traveling too that we need to keep in our prayers. According to your list here, she says back in the hospital with seizures. I was reading off of your list, so I don't have anything more current than that. So. Yeah. So, Brother Jeremy, would you lead us in a prayer then, please?
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the ability to be here this morning to study your word, to worship you. We are thankful for the first day of the week. Father, we are thankful for your love and mercy and kindness for us, and we pray for all those who have been mentioned that are sick, those who are going through treatments, those who are bereaved, Father, who are experiencing loss. We pray for those who are sick and in the hospital, they can get well and be home. Those who have procedures upcoming, that those things would go well for them. Father, we pray for Brother Johnson that he'll be able to find kidneys that match and he can get that procedure that he so desperately needs. And Father, we continue to pray for Brother Turner and for Darrell as they are fighting cancer. We're so thankful for the doctors and the nurses and their abilities and all of the technology that you have allowed us to discover and have. And Father, we pray that everyone that we mentioned can be well, if it be your will. Thankful for Christ, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Okay. Today we're going to be looking at Elisha healing Naaman. That's in 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings chapter 5. And we're not going to make it through the first verse before I pause and try to pull some things together just to give us a little background, a little understanding. But it says, now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria. All right. Who is the king of Syria? Where is Syria? And how does it relate to everything that's going on? If you'll slide back into 1 Kings chapter 20. 1 Kings chapter 20. Verse 1 says, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, gathered all his host together, and there were 32 kings with him, and horses and chariots, and he went up and besieged Samaria and warred against it. And then if you'll stay in that same chapter and go over to verse 34, and Ben-Hadad said unto him, the cities which my father took from thy father I will restore, and thou shalt make streets for thee in Damascus as my father made in Samaria. Then said Ahab, I will send thee away with this covenant. So he made a covenant with him and sent him away. All right. Let's start this way. Let's start in the timeline. Ahab was the father of Ahaziah and of Ahab. I'm sorry. Ahab was the father of Ahaziah and Jehoram. Now, Ahab's father, Omri, is the one who basically had the city of Samaria become the capital of Israel. Ben-Hadad and Syria, the capital of Syria is Damascus, and Ben-Hadad is more like a title than it is an individual. So in 1 Kings chapter 20, when we looked at it, where it said, thy father had done this to thy father, now I'm doing, and we're doing this. So the Ben-Hadad that we're looking at right here in 2 Kings chapter 5 would, I guess, in essence be Ben-Hadad the second, because he ruled until 841, and as you recall from last week, Jehoram ruled till 841, so they are contemporaries at this point. Now, Syria is also known as Assyria and by the name of Aram if you go back into history. Now, I failed to get a map together, so we're going to have to do it. I'm going to have to talk you through it. If you will start down here, this little glob down here is the Dead Sea. And then from the Dead Sea, you go up to the Sea of Galilee, and that's the Jordan River that connects those two. Then you have an east side and a west side. Now, on the west side, I'm turning my map around so y'all will be looking at it like I'm the map, but on the west side, what three tribes was on the west side? Reuben, Gad, half the tribe of Manasseh. Well, half the tribe of Manasseh is up on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. And then to the west and northwest, northwest of there is Syria and Damascus. So now if you come back down to the east side, Samaria, that was developed and turned into Samaria, was in what would be Manasseh on the west side. Got that all straight? In essence, from Jerusalem, which was basically on the border of Benjamin and Judah, from Jerusalem up about 30 miles, you would get to Samaria. Samaria is approximately 30 miles from the Jordan River. From Samaria to Damascus, as the crow flies, is roughly 115 miles. So that tells you that there's going to be a lot of territory covered here. And we need to know that, because we're going to get back to some of that in just a minute. And then it says Naaman, the captain of the host. And look how it identifies him. It says he was a great man in his master's eye. He was honorable because the Lord had given him deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor. What does it mean to be a mighty man in valor?
New American Standard says a valiant warrior.
Valiant warrior. It's sort of wordplay, but that's basically a good soldier.
And you're successful because you're still living.
Successful because he's still living. But then, what's the last line say? He was a leper. Now, if you go back into the book of Leviticus and all, and chapters 13 and 14, I believe it is, and read about leprosy, there were varying degrees of leprosy. So it appears as though Naaman had leprosy, but his was sort of a mild case, or not disabling at this point anyway, because he was still a warrior. Also, the Syrians, you know, everybody has their little groups that they don't like or they pick on. All through history, this group will do battle with this group, they'll raid them, and etc. And that's what's going to take place here. It says, verse 2, the Syrians had gone out by companies and brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. So the Syrians, and we'll go all the way back to Kings, where the battle was taking place between Samaria and Syria, Israel, Syria. They had gone out on a little raiding party, or war party, I guess you could call it. And as custom was back in those days, they would just round up people, take their cattle, do whatever they wanted to with them, and they would bring back people to be their servants or their slaves. And here, some flying critter tried to attack me. Here where it says little maid, remember last week when I used the phrase, the Hebrew word nayar, to define a young male, anywhere from infancy up to adolescence? Well, the word maid here is na'ara, Naharaw, which means the same thing. It's the female version of everything from an infant to an adolescent. Now, with the phrase before the maid there, little, that in context means that this was a young girl that was old enough to, well, back in those days, everything from, say, 8, 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that, they could do chores and take care of things, but they're still young. So I think that's what that's trying to describe here, that it's a young girl. A maid is not married yet, little meaning younger, could even be small in stature, but I believe it's talking about age here. So it's a young girl that is going to take care of Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, and this again tells me why I think she's a little bit older, but not into the necessarily older teenage years yet, because she's old enough to know what's going on around her. Said unto her mistress, would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. Now the wording of that's a little bit strange, but it really, and when you look at my Lord, she is talking about Naaman, because they referred to their owners or masters as Lord. So she's referring to Naaman and says, if Naaman got with the prophet down in Israel, the prophet would heal Naaman of his leprosy. Questions, comments?
But he had trouble, he was a soldier, I guess. People following him with leprosy because the kids stay away from people like that, don't they?
Well, he is not a Semite. He's not Jew. You know, they had real rigorous rules about going to the priest and the priest declaring them clean and unclean. And with him being a Gentile and having a mild case, apparently he didn't have any problem, because his people went with him when he went to, and he was able to go in before the king, and the king was trying to take care of him instead of saying, you go hide somewhere.
It was feared it was bad enough, or was going to progress to be bad enough, that it was worth doing all this. Leviticus 13:14 talks about the fact that it kind of comes and goes as far as those periods of time when you're considered unclean on the Jewish side. But I would think medically that they would probably have something similar, where you have flare-ups. So when those spots on your skin are white and
Yes, sir.
But they were allowed to come back when that kind of subsided. So he may have been in that case where most of the time he was okay, and some of the time he couldn't go to battle or had to sit out, things like that. So.
And also, leprosy is one of those very, very odd diseases that prepubescent people can't get it. The young kids will stay at home until they are just about to change, and then they will be told to leave and separate. Why? Nobody knows, but the young people who have not reached puberty won't be affected by leprosy, which is odd. Yes, sir.
It speaks well of this Israelite girl, and I hope if it was my situation like Joseph, no matter what happens, she just was captured and taken somewhere to be a slave, and yet she cares enough about the person that captured her to say, hey, if he was back in my home country, he'd be cured, because she knows, is leprosy not fatal?
It progresses into that. Yeah. Verse 4, King James says, and one went in, and the one there is referring to Naaman. Like I say, this particular section, you really have to look at it in context to see who's doing what to who. But Naaman went in and told his Lord, which would be Ben-Hadad, saying, thus and thus the maid that is of the land of Israel. So he now goes and tells the king of Syria what this captive girl from Israel said. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment. That seems like a verse that doesn't need to be there, but when we get to a little bit later, we'll find out just how important that verse is. So verse 6, he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is coming to thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. So king to king, these two kings are not really seeing eye to eye most of the time, but here he's sending a letter to the king of Samaria saying, or Israel saying, heal my captain. Next verse is most interesting. It came to pass when the king of Israel had read the letter, and that he rent his clothes, and said, Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. Now, Jehoram is the king of Israel at this time. Who is Jehoram's father? Ahab. What kind of king was Ahab? The worst. What kind of king is Jehoram? Like his father. So they're Baal worshipers. They know very little about what's going on with God and all. So the prophet here, even though they have connection with and talk to the prophets, he thinks that the king of Syria is trying to say, well, if you don't heal him, that gives me a good reason to come down and fight with you again. Verse 8, And it was so, when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. There is a prophet in Israel. He had to remind Jehoram what was going on. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariots and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. I want you to think for just a minute now. Two nations that don't really get along most of the time. captain, meaning a very important person in the army of the one, is going to a prophet, not even a person of royalty in his mind at this point, what kind of attitude is he going to approach that house? Hmm? I'm important. He stood at that door. Elisha sent a messenger unto him, which is totally contrary to the way things were supposed to be done. When royalty or high-profile people come from another country, they were supposed to be met with royal treatment. If you recall the Queen of Sheba, when she came to see Solomon, what did she bring with her? Loads of stuff. What did Solomon do for her? Let her take loads of stuff back. So there was this thing that took place that they were treated special. But here Elisha sends a messenger out to meet him. And then all he said to him was, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. Put yourself in the mind of Naaman at this point. The slave, the girl that he had captured from Israel, tells his wife, go see this prophet and he'll heal you. He makes a 120-mile roughly trip from Damascus down to Samaria, knocks on the guy's door. He don't even meet him. He sends out somebody to meet him, a messenger, and says, go 30 miles over there in the Jordan and wash 7 times. What's going through this guy's mind?
I think it's similar, Larry. I've done it. I know everybody else here has done it, where you make an appointment with somebody, and for business, you make an appointment, you go there, and then their assistant's there. They're not available, or they didn't come to the meeting, and the person that's there can't make any decisions, so you basically wasted your time.
Yeah. I went to see this man to heal me, and he sends out this guy, and all he tells me is to go wash in that dirty river. What a waste.
You got to think too that obviously the Syrians are religious people, as we'd say today, right? They were highly religious. They had their own gods and all of their own quote unquote miracles. You know, their prophets and these people that did all of these magic tricks. And so they're used to a real flashy, showy. You know, we just read about not too long ago those guys that were cutting themselves up and everything else in front of their god. And so he's expecting something like that, I'm sure, right? He comes with all this stuff and all this.
I'm glad you give us a teaser on that, because we're going to get back to the flashy and all of that in just a minute. So, but
So he was angry.
he was definitely upset and angry at that point, because remember the verse I told you seemed like it might not be too important. All that wealth he brought down to give to the guy that could heal him. And the guy sends a messenger out and says, go bathe in that dirty water. Naaman was wroth and went away and said, behold, I thought. Is that not a problem with many of us today? Instead of reading the Bible and looking at it and seeing what it says and doing what it says, we think we want to interject our opinions. Behold, I thought, he will surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike or move his hand over the place and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. He came to Naaman with a preconceived idea of this is what you got, what he's going to do with me. And Elisha put him in his place. He sent a messenger to meet him, didn't show him the honor that was due him at that point. Just sort of backed him on his heels a little bit. But then his servant came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? This is where we're going to get back to what Brother Jeremy said about the flash and all. How many of you have ever been in conversations with people about the church, and when they find out how simple we do things, they're taken a little aback? Y'all don't do this, y'all don't do that. The preacher gets up and preaches. You're baptized in water, just no ceremony, no theatrics, no robes, collars, hats. As Jeremy said, the religion of Syria at the time, they were into the symbols and the flash and all like that. But here, Naaman was expecting some great show to take place, and all he was told was to go bathe. What are we as told to do to become a Christian? Not dip 7 times, but what are we to do? Get that water. Go under that water. What power does that water have? None. What power does the person standing there doing the baptizing have? None. Where does the power come from? The obedience of the person being baptized. When a person says, I will obey, I will do what you say, as simple as this is, and when they go under the water, the power of God, that's what takes place. And it's going to take place with Naaman here when he said, so then he went down, dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. All he had to do was be obedient. Yes, sir.
Isn't it interesting that Naaman couldn't see that, but his servants could? You know, he brought 750 pounds of gold, silver, I think it is, about 150 pounds of gold in all of this raiment. Imagine the amount of horses and packs, and you know, that was a huge operation. He had that power, right, to gather all that stuff up. He had the wealth, the success, the ability to bring that. That was nothing to him to bring that. And he couldn't see that it wasn't about his power or his might that was going to make him heal. That just as easy as healing him, you know, the servant of God could heal anybody. A servant, that little girl that he took, you know, anybody at all. It's the same with baptism. With salvation in general, we have to understand that our worth to God isn't measured like our worth to the world. We struggle with that, I think, sometimes, especially here in this country, because we are so successful and blessed and prosperous. It can be very easy to let that get in the way of our understanding that we have to surrender to God.
Yes, sir.
Something else, I have used this passage numerous times to talk to people about prayer. When you pray for things, God doesn't always answer what you're looking for, but he gives you the answer you need. Naaman got what he needed, but not in the way he wanted it.
Right. So he returned to the man of God and all his company, and came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, now I know there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. Now, I said when he first approached Elisha, he was the captain of the Syrian army. He was the big chief. Elisha took him down a notch or two by sending out his servant. When he comes back the second time, what's his attitude? His attitude has totally changed. He now comes and says, there is no God but the God of Israel. Now he's wanting to pay Elisha for the treatment that he received. Now notice, he was angry when he left. He went 30 miles thereabouts over to the Jordan River, did what he was instructed to do, and he's healed. He's approximately 30 miles closer to home, because from Samaria to Damascus, you got to go across the Jordan River and up. But what does he do? He goes back the other way. He takes a detour, round-trip detour of over 60 miles. By the time you go the 30 miles back and then heading back, you're over a 60-mile detour to give honor and praise to what the prophet had told him, what Elisha had told him. And he was willing, and he was now going to heap all this treasure on him that he had brought. But look at Naaman's response. Not Naaman, I keep getting them confused. Elisha's response. Verse 16. But he said, as the Lord liveth before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman urged Elisha to take it, but he refused. Now it was customary in those days for the prophet, those that would heal people or tell them things, to receive money. If you recall the story of Saul when they was going out looking for the animals, and they'd run out of time, run out of food, and they was going to go see a prophet. He said, I don't have anything to give him. And his servant said, I've got some money. So it was customary for that. So why, if it was customary for the prophet to receive something, did he refuse Naaman's money?
It's like he's being paid to heal them. And that's not what Elisha wanted.
It goes right back to what Brother Jeremy had said about us and our wealth and what we're doing. Elisha was telling him, this is not something you bought. This is a gift from God. I don't want your money. God don't want your money. So if we get into the New Testament, what happened when certain individuals saw miracles and wanted to purchase the power to do things? He was turned down and had a little trouble. So Elisha is now telling him, nope, not going to happen. Don't want your money. And Naaman said, shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules, burdens of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offerings nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. Now, there's a couple of different ways people look at this particular passage, and it would be too lengthy to get into them. So where I'm going with this is the phrase that he said, that I will not offer sacrifices to any other god. Naaman is now a convert. But is he a total convert? Because the next verse says, in this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. He is asking an indulgence. Where have we heard the word indulgence before? Back during the Crusades and all, when the church was trying to find people to go fight, they'd say, pay me now and you can, it'll cover a sin later. And that's the reason I asked the question, was he a total convert? Because he said, I will not offer sacrifice to any other God other than the God of Israel. Now, I want the Lord to pardon me when I go into this pagan house of worship and have to bow with my Lord. The man that's going to put his hand on me and I'm going to assist. Comments on that part?
He's not a true believer at that point, in my opinion, because the fact that if you were true, you would try to convert those others that are doing these false worshiping and stuff like that, although it is the king. So,
When a person is a convert, today when somebody becomes a Christian and they go down into that water through obedience and they come up out of that water, they are a new creature, meaning they are supposed to let go of all lifestyle. But today, how many people go into that water, come out of that water, and go do the same job they was doing or the same work or hang around with the same people? They come as close as they can come.
Sometimes it does take growth, Larry.
Sometimes what?
It takes growth. I mean, you still got to support your family, so I don't need you to quit your job the next day, but you make big efforts to get out of that. He sounds like he's not making that. When I do this, I need forgiveness.
Yeah. I'm the captain, the king here.
He's expected to do that.
I'm expected to do this, so therefore, God, I believe in you and I want to obey you, but you're going to have to work with me on this.
We call it playing both sides.
Playing both sides against the middle. Something to think about. Something serious to think about.
Larry, what's he gonna do with all that there?
Don't know. What you think?
Is his intent that he would have some God's dirt that he could sacrifice on, that he'd make him a little pod almost?
For himself, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd,
That's what it sounds like.
odd thing.
he thought that his God wasn't a God of all the earth. And he looked at Israel where there was a God, and his thinking, maybe he thought that God was only a God in Israel, but God is God over all creation. So it's like Jeremy said, he didn't want to take a piece of that dirt, thinking he's taking God with him.
Yeah.
And have access, so. But this is to show that God is God, and there is only one God for all. And the only God that has power to heal miraculously is God himself. So, yeah.
That would be similar to us now. There's the people who buy the little vial that has the splinter of the cross on it. Or, where's the cross? And they think, okay, I can't be religious without that symbol. That's not where God is. God's everywhere.
Yeah, that's why, even though I love archaeology and history and research and all, I just believe that there are certain things that are not meant to be found, such as parts of what they call the spear of destiny, and also the chalice and certain things are not meant to be had because people would worship them instead of God. But Naaman then leaves, heads back, and Gehazi, who is Elisha's servant, gets this idea that he runs after him to get some money. So verse 21, Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" And he said, "All is well. My master has sent me," lie 1, saying, "Behold, even now there come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets." We went into a big discussion on this a week or 2 ago. "Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of raiment." As Brother Jeremy had mentioned on the silver and gold and raiments that was being carried, in essence, a talent of silver was going to weigh somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on which source you look at, 100, 120 pounds. So Naaman said, be content, take 2 talents and the and various garments. And Naaman even put 2 of his servants to carry the load. One person couldn't carry all that, so he sends 2 people back with Gehazi carrying all that stuff. But then Elisha questions Gehazi about it. Where you been? What you been doing? And Gehazi told another lie and said, nothing. And then Elisha said, don't you know I was with you? So in spirit, he knew everything that was going on and what was taking place. And in verse 27, the leprosy therefore of Naaman shall cleave unto thee and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow. So Naaman, a Gentile, and by the way, this is the only person that Elisha healed of leprosy, was a Gentile and not a Semite, not a person of Israel. And so the Gentile comes and he's converted, or at least acknowledges now that there is a God, the God of Israel, and that's one that he wants to worship, even though he's going back to his home territory and got to do something different. And then Elisha's messenger, number 1 in charge, helper, Gehazi, lied, tried to benefit from what had taken place, and his punishment was leprosy. Forever, even to be passed down to other family members. I had to speed up there at the end because I saw David come in counting, and my clock says we got a minute to go, so wanted to get finished with it. But questions, comments then?
Well, with Gehazi receiving all of this, now he's a rich person. But riches don't get him. He's got leprosy now. So he will be ostracized from society.
Yeah.
What's crazy is he's seen Elisha do all these things. He's seen the mama bears come out of the woods and kill the kids, and he saw the widow's oil run over it, and he saw the other lady's son be healed or be brought back to life. And he's now seen Naaman be healed of this leprosy. He knows better, and still temptation gets him. He has seen the power of God personally, take place, all these miracles, and he still lets temptation, greed, take over.
Yeah.
That's a big warning for us.
He was working on Naaman's weakness because Naaman had wanted to pay for it, was refused, and then he thought he still owed something and was willing to give it away. Brother Golden.
Looks like when Elisha wouldn't associate with Naaman when he had the active case of leprosy, but once he was cured, he knew it. So it must have something to do with him having an active case of leprosy. Once he was cured of that, he would associate.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and that is a point to consider because they were supposed to stay away from people like that. However, he was a prophet, and if he thought that, why would he send his best man, Gehazi, or a messenger to do the communicating? He wasn't going to come in contact and touch him anyway. And I personally think it was just to say, you think you're something? God's in charge here now. I personally just think he was trying to back him down a notch or 2 off of his ego. But anybody else on that?
Well, I think, too, he disassociated
Right.
And so if he associated himself with taking the treasures and all that, that would bring accepting glory himself, like Matthew says, where let our light shine, so God gets the glory, not us. So we have to disassociate us with our life and that in which we live as a Christian. The power is not in us, it's in the power of God through his word. So, that's one thing we want him to, I think he wanted to do, when he sent a messenger with the child that died ahead of him. See, so, that's one aspect.
Yes, sir. I think you're on the right track there, and it didn't work the first time because he came back to pay him, but then when he refused the money, then he said, there is no God except the God of Israel. So,
He told Elisha, I'm your servant.
right.
That's interesting too.
Yes, sir. Thank you all so much for your comments.